Hello everyone and welcome to another Kerbal space program video, and in today's adventure I'm going to be doing something kind of silly but also something that I had an idea for this and I thought it would be fun to try and do, basically making a mini scale Saturn V. One thing I've noticed when people make Saturn Vs in this game, or Saturn V replicas using the Making History Saturn V parts, you often find that you end up with massively more fuel than you really need. I know when I made my Saturn V replica for the Making History release, I had to drain a lot of the tanks and ditch tanks whilst they were still kind of half filled with fuel, just to kind of make my recreation of the mission profile more faithful. So I thought, let's see how small we can make in Saturn V. So it's only got one capacity for one Kerbal instead of the three. Well, I guess 3 astronauts, not 3 Kerbals was the real Saturn V. So it's not like a historically accurate representation of the Saturn V, but I just something I wanted to do basically to see if we could make like a miniature scale, like a sort of mini rocket version of it. I thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to try. So that's the thesis for this video. So I am building it sort of miniature scale, but I am trying to keep the actual kind of engine profiles and all and staging accurate to the real life rocket. So every stage will have the correct number of engines. It won't have the right kind of engine because obviously we're working at a smaller scale, so we can't use the Saturn V engines in the game because one F1 engine in KSP is basically the same diameter as our main fuel tank. So we're going for like 5 J2s there in the second stage, and then we're going to do 5 F1 engines, but not really F1 engines for the initial lifting stage. So like I say, they're not the correct engines, but it's the correct number of engines, and each stage will get detached at the correct stage in the mission. I don't think I bothered doing a free return trajectory in this mission though, so sorry about that. But everything else I think is pretty accurate. You can see I had to create my own launch escape system for the top of the tower because, again, the stock launch escape system is too big for what we need in this mission. So all we need to do now is sort out our staging, and then we can recreate the crawler part of the mission where we have to wheel it out of the vehicle assembly building and get it to the launch pad. So it's a bit precarious. I'm trying to get it to sort of straddle the rails just there. I know the Kerbals have the more Russian approach of having a rail system to get rockets to the launch pad rather than the NASA approach of just having a big car. Probably a bit of an understatement to call it a car, but you get the idea. So yeah, just sort of teetering it as we get to the launch pad and we can get ready for launch. I can quickly show you a shot actually of the our mini scale Saturn V compared to a correctly scaled Saturn V, which actually looks a little bit different. The top stage is slightly longer than the normal Saturn V replicas you might be used to seeing. And that's because this is a rocket that I've designed with another mission in mind. So I'm going to show you kind of what a Saturn V can do at this mini scale in KSP, but what can we do with a fully fledged Saturn V if we were to push it beyond the months. That's going to be either next week or the week after's video, just to kind of show you how far a Saturn V can really go in the Kerbal system if we want it to go somewhere beyond Kerbin. Anyway, let's get back to the mission at hand. As you can see, we have a very graceful launch from the launch pad and crawler, and we can start heading our way into the black. So our 5 representative F1 engines are burning nicely as we ascend through the thickest parts of Kerbin's atmosphere, and once we've kind of got through the supersphere, we can detach that lower tank and start burning our more efficient J2 representative engines in the upper parts of the atmosphere. Although we need the big powerful F1 at first, just because obviously this is when the rocket's at its heaviest and we're having to fight the most air resistance, which you can see those shockwaves forming along the body of the rocket. But it is no match for the power of the Saturn V as we are ascending very quickly actually. So yep, we can ditch that lower stage now. I put some separatrons there just to ensure we've got a nice clean separation from the upper stage. And yeah, actually this was a pretty quick ascent, wasn't it? My gravity turns, as you all know, 0.45 degrees by the time you reach 10 kilometers, then just gradually tip over from there, trying to get a nice sort of curve as you go through the atmosphere. That's what I was going for here. In fact, it's probably not the most efficient ascent here, but I do have a little bit of surplus fuel, so if I can fly a little bit inefficiently, we should be okay. But like I say, I was trying to make it so I wasn't ditching full fuel tanks, because that's not especially realistic, so I am trying to use every fuel tank to completion. So obviously the second stage of the Saturn V does most of the pushing to parking Earth orbit. The final stage, well, this not the final stage, but this stage here, which is just a single engine is going to do our circularization and our burn for the Mun. This is the part in the recreation of the Saturn V mission which I didn't get completely right. Normally, what the Apollo missions did, they did something called a free return trajectory. So if we were to, say, have some sort of mission failure along the way and ended up not being able to land on the moon, or something else happened to the craft, we would drift past the moon and get slingshotted straight into Earth's atmosphere again. Without needing to do any more engine burning, just like in the event of kind of a critical failure or something like that. But, you know, the Kerbals, clumsy as they may be, are very good at designing engines, because engines in KSP, unless you're using a mod or the mission builder profile, engines never ever fail in this game, as do, like, nothing else really goes wrong in KSP, except for, of course, things caused by user error, which is a pretty critical thing, I must admit, but at least as far as the parts are concerned, we don't need to be worrying about mission failures. So a free return trajectory, not really a problem. So I don't think I've ever used this engine before. This is the Cheetah engine, I think. It just looked kind of like the most... It just fit the size of the craft the best in terms of what we needed it to do. The Wolfhound was a little bit too efficient, so I went with the Cheetah. So there's our Mun encounter there. As you can see, we've now run out of fuel, which is just as well, because we're obviously on a Mun collision, but that means that when we ditch our fairings in the lower stage, they're going to smash into the surface of the moon without leaving any debris in orbit. So now we can do the iconic Apollo craft reconfiguration part of the mission, where we detach the command pod and then dock it to the lander, and then pull the whole thing away from the assembly and continue our way to the moon. So yeah, the lander, like I said, had to be very, very small in order to fit the Saturn V profile, so I couldn't have a command pod, and I could only have kind of the one seat there. I guess I could have made this craft a little bit bigger and used the Gemini, or is it the Mercury? I can't even remember what it's supposed to be a recreation of now, pod in KSP, you know, the two-seater one. But I kind of wanted to keep this nice and small scale, and that pod is black and doesn't have a white variant, I don't think, whereas the Mark I cockpit does have a white variant, which makes it look a little bit more kind of fitting with the Saturn V, although that admittedly was a silver pod, so it's still not particularly close. Anyway, we have entered the Mun, at least I should say, we've entered the Mun's sphere of influence, so we can just warp our way down to periapsis and prepare to do our circularization retrograde burn. Which, this is kind of the one part of the mission I did over engineer. Actually, I think I calculated my delta V a little bit inaccurately, because we have quite a lot of extra fuel in that command pod stage. So that's the part of the mission which I feel like I didn't do particularly well on, because we have surplus fuel here, and I wanted to try and keep things as close, you know, keep the fuel levels as close as possible, really. But it is a minor point. So, yep, we can get our Kerbal EVA'd into the command pod. Another difference, obviously, the Saturn V, they could just transfer directly through the docking units. So this is really closer to how the N1 Soviet rocket would have worked. Although the M1 never flew successfully, the Soviet plan was the cosmonauts would have to do an EVA. Spinning away the command pod. The cosmonauts would have had to do an EVA to get into the lunar lander. Although calling this a lunar lander is somewhat of a stretch, I'd say more just like a lawn chair strapped to a booster. 2 boosters to be precise, because I'm still trying to keep things faithful to the Saturn V profile, so we're going to have the Apollo-style lunar lander setup. So we have one stage dedicated to our landing, and then an upper stage just for our ascent from the surface of the moon. Again, probably a little bit too much fuel here, but I wasn't sure kind of what kind of biome I'd be landing in. If I was landing on slopes, I'd have to do some more additional adjustment burns during the descent to avoid any steep slope areas. So that's why I've got a little bit of extra fuel on this landing stage. And obviously, it enables us to keep our descent nice and slow as we approach the surface. So make sure that our Kerbal there is safe at all times. Or, you know, as safe as someone can be when they're in a situation such as this. And we have one apprehensive waddle for a Kerbal, but one clumsy lurch for Kerbal kind. We can collect our surface samples, do a little bit of science, but then comes one of the more challenging aspects of any Apollo recreation, and that is, of course, getting ourselves back to the lunar command module. So we're back in the ship, just here. I've got the target set on the map, and then we're going to initiate that ascent stage and get ourselves into an orbit. Now we are kind of launching against the moon's rotation. I should have made the parking orbit for the command pod the other way around. It's kind of orbiting backwards, but we have enough fuel, so it doesn't really make a difference. And the delta V difference in terms of which way you launch on the Mun is negligible compared to how it would be on somewhere like Kerbin or Eve or Tylo or somewhere, so not too much of a problem. So yeah, we can start flying flat relatively quickly. I did have a slightly steeper ascent initially just because we are inside a giant crater and I didn't want to smash into the wall of the crater. That would have been a rather somber ending to this historic mission. Yeah, I think that's the Ant engine, which again, I don't think I've actually used this engine before. I've never really... Micro-scale missions are something I've never really done. I know people like Bradley Wistons and Turbo Pumped, that's more their thing to do the ultralight Juna missions and Eve missions and all that. But I don't know, it's never really been something that I've been too interested in. So I've never really used the really, really super tiny engines. This is why I haven't used ion engines very much. But... there's a first time for everything, and this is... I'm not claiming this to be a micro-scale mission by any means. In fact, you could easily make an even smaller Saturn V if you wanted to forego having an actual command pod there and wanted to instead create your own command pod using like wing pieces and put a launcher inside, a bit like... I think Shadowzone did something like that. He did like a mini-scale space shuttle or something, so you could do something like that if you wanted to kind of make an even smaller Saturn V, but I wanted to have like a real command pod for this mission, at least for the main command unit that we'd be leaving in Mun orbit, which as you can see we are rapidly approaching. There it is, or briefly. We can just burn retrograde relative to our target until we're nice and close and slow down a little bit more and get ourselves lined up. Now it's not got any crew on board because obviously it's only a one-seater, so it does have a probe core so it can be controlled robotically. We don't really need to do that though. Our Kerbal here is more than capable of doing an EVA and getting back onto the command unit. And then I thought it would be kind of nice actually if we did dock the two together, so we can get inside this thing, point ourselves towards our target and do a quick dock using our monopropellant engines. Some of you may be wondering where the monopropellant tank is on this craft because there's no monopropellant tank visible, and that's because I'm just using the onboard monopropellant storage that comes with the command pod. You don't get very much, but we don't really need very much, so it's fine. All we're going to do here is just deorbit, get ourselves into a kind of collision course, just so we can ditch that moon lander and not have it left in orbit, and then we can accelerate again, so we won't be meeting the same fate. And then we can think about getting back to Kerbin. Again, as you can see, we're going to be leaving the moon sphere of influence in a slightly different direction to what we normally do because obviously we're orbiting in a different direction. It was a complete oversight on my part. I completely didn't notice which direction we were orbiting until it came to rendezvous, and at that point I couldn't really be bothered to go back. But it worked out quite well in the end because for once we're actually going to be re-entering on the light side of Kerbin, which means for you guys you can have a better view. YouTube's algorithm does tend to make videos look a lot darker than they were when they were raw footage. I try and mitigate this as much as possible by upping the brightness, but there's only so much I can really do. But we are reaching the conclusion of this mission, really, so I hope you enjoyed this strange endeavour. There's only... I feel like most formats of Moon Mission have been done, but I've not seen anyone kind of do this sort of thing where you make a small version of a real-life rocket, except I know Shadowzone did the mini shuttle, but I haven't really seen anything else. This is something it's an idea I had of maybe creating like rockets to scale in KSP and then building them as small as possible to execute the mission. So obviously in this example it would be making a small scale Saturn V and doing a Mun landing, and then taking the full scale rocket and seeing how far that can be pushed in KSP. So I had an idea maybe doing this sort of thing again with a space shuttle. So build a full sized space shuttle, see how far that can go, although admittedly most of a space shuttle is just a cargo bay, so probably not very far. I got a bit bored during the descent just here, by the way, and decided to do a parachute landing instead, as in, an EVA parachute landing. Yeah, that'll be the space shuttle. Then obviously the Soviets have got lots and lots of rockets themselves, and even things like a Falcon 9, how far can that go in KSP if we were to use nuclear engines for the upper stage, things like that. So maybe it's an interesting thing. I don't think many rockets are quite as iconic as the Saturn V is though, so I don't know. We'll have to see how this goes really. But we can approach touchdown in just a second, and then we can sit back and watch the graceful touchdown of the lander. And as you can see, I accidentally time warped and it got destroyed. Whoops! On screen, moving away from that, on screen there are some links to more videos that you can watch. Bye.